Sarah Thompson clutched her daughter's worn teddy bear as she stared out the window at the vast North Dakota prairie. 20 years had passed since 8-year-old Lily vanished from the small town of Oakwood, population 3,200. Sarah's phone rang, breaking the silence. "Mrs. Thompson? This is Detective Rivera. We found him." The words she had waited to hear for 2 decades. A local farmer named Richard Pearson, the friendly mechanic who had fixed their car just days before Lily disappeared, had been arrested. DNA evidence from a single blonde hair preserved for 20 years had finally spoken the truth. The morning of June 7, 2001, began like any other in Oakwood, North Dakota. The warm summer air carried the scent of fresh wheat and distant rain as Lily Thompson skipped down Maple Street toward her friend's house 3 blocks away. Her blonde pigtails bounced with each step, her favorite red backpack slung over her small shoulders. At 10:15 a.m., Mrs. Nelson, who lived halfway between the houses, waved to Lily from her garden. Lily waved back, her gap-toothed smile brightening the already sunny morning. It was the last time anyone in Oakwood would see Lily Thompson. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 12:30 p.m., Lily's friend Bethany called the Thompson house, confused about why Lily never arrived for their playdate. Sarah Thompson felt the first prickle of unease as she dialed other neighborhood parents. By 1:45 p.m., that unease had transformed into raw panic. The 3 blocks between their homes had swallowed her daughter whole. Oakwood was the kind of place where people rarely locked their doors. Children played freely in sprawling wheat fields and rode bicycles until sunset without parents worrying. A town where everyone knew everyone, their stories, their struggles, their triumphs. Sarah and Michael Thompson had moved there from Minneapolis 5 years earlier, seeking that very safety and close community for raising their 2 children. At 38, Sarah taught 2nd grade at Oakwood Elementary, beloved for her patience and creativity. Michael, 40, managed the local grain elevator, a steady, reliable presence in both his home and community. They lived in a modest 2-story house with a wide porch where neighbors often gathered for lemonade and conversation. Their son Jason was 12, and Lily, their spirited youngest, had just finished 2nd grade with honors in spelling and art. Michael Thompson was working at the grain elevator when Sarah's frantic call came through. He abandoned his afternoon meeting instantly, racing home in his pickup truck, dust billowing behind him on the county road. By the time he arrived, Sheriff Dean Larson was already in their living room, his weathered face grave as he took notes in a small pad. "How long has she been missing?" Sheriff Larson asked, his deep voice calm but tense. 3 hours, Sarah replied, clutching Lily's school photo. "She left to walk to Bethany's at 10 a.m. "It's only 3 blocks, Sheriff. She's made that walk 100 times." Michael paced the worn carpet, running his hands through his graying hair. "She wouldn't just wander off. Lily knows better." Sheriff Larson nodded, keying his radio. Within minutes, deputies began arriving at the Thompson home. By 3 p.m., the quiet street had transformed. Police cruisers with flashing lights lined the curb. Neighbors gathered in concerned clusters on the sidewalk, voices hushed as they watched uniformed officers fan out through the neighborhood. The initial search focused on the direct route between the Thompson and Miller homes, checking yards, garages, the small wooded area behind the elementary school. Officers knocked on every door, asking if anyone had seen a small blonde girl in a blue dress and red backpack. The community response was immediate. Teachers from Oakwood Elementary, parents from Lily's class, members from the Thompsons' church, all abandoned their afternoon plans to join the growing search party. As twilight approached, anxiety tightened its grip on the town. Flashlights pierced the gathering darkness as voices called Lily's name across parks and empty lots. Sarah stood on the porch, her face pale in the fading light, jumping at every approaching footstep or car door, hoping each might bring her daughter home. Inside, Michael sat at the kitchen table, answering the same questions repeatedly as investigators built their timeline. Did Lily seem upset this morning? Any changes in behavior recently? Any strangers showing interest in her? The questions pierced Michael's heart with each repetition. She was happy, he insisted. Making plans for summer swimming lessons. Excited about her playdate. As midnight approached, Sheriff Larson expanded the search perimeter. What began as a 3-block radius now encompassed the entire town and stretched toward the surrounding farmland. The local fire department brought in additional spotlights, illuminating fields of young wheat as volunteers walked in grid patterns, calling Lily's name into the vast Dakota night. By dawn on June 8, exhaustion had settled over Oakwood like a heavy fog. Search teams rotated, allowing volunteers a few hours of rest before returning to the effort. The Thompsons' living room had transformed into a command center, maps spread across tables, landline phones ringing constantly, coffee brewing nonstop in the kitchen. The morning news from Bismarck arrived with camera crews and reporters, their presence both a blessing and an intrusion. Their broadcast ensured Lily's photo reached across the state, but their questions forced the Thompsons to repeatedly voice their worst fears. "We're treating this as a missing person case," Sheriff Larson told reporters, choosing his words carefully. "We're asking everyone in Oakwood and surrounding communities to check outbuildings, vehicles, anywhere a child might wander or be hidden." The careful phrasing didn't escape the Thompsons. Not an abduction, not yet officially, but the unspoken possibility hung in the air like a thundercloud. Sarah clung to hope, telling reporters through tears, "Lily is smart. She would try to find her way home or find help." At noon, the first potential break came. A red backpack was discovered in a ditch along County Road 7, 2 miles outside of town. Sarah identified it immediately, her hands shaking as she pointed to the small unicorn keychain attached to the zipper. "That's Lily's. I put her lunch inside it yesterday morning." The search immediately shifted to the rural area surrounding the discovery. Dogs were brought in from the state police K-9 unit, following scents from the backpack across fields and toward Creekside Lane, a rarely used dirt road that wound through farmland. The animals tracked along the lane for nearly a mile before losing the trail near an abandoned barn. The weathered structure, its red paint long faded to a dull rust, stood alone against the horizon. Teams approached methodically, officers with hands on holsters entering first. Sarah and Michael waited in a deputy's vehicle, holding each other's hands so tightly their knuckles whitened. Minutes stretched like hours until Sheriff Larson emerged from the barn, shaking his head. No sign of Lily inside. As the search continued around the barn, officers discovered fresh tire tracks leading from the back of the structure toward the county highway. Plaster casts were made, photographs taken. "These are recent," the state police technician confirmed. "Last day or two. Distinctive tread pattern, could be from a pickup or SUV." That evening, the FBI officially joined the investigation. Special Agent Catherine Martinez arrived from the Bismarck Field Office, bringing additional resources and expertise in child abductions. Her presence formalized what many had feared but none had voiced: Lily Thompson's disappearance was no longer considered a lost child case. "The first 48 hours are critical in these situations," Agent Martinez explained during the briefing at Oakwood's small police station. "Based on the discovery of the backpack and the tire tracks, we're treating this as a suspected abduction." The word fell like a physical blow. Sarah collapsed into Michael's arms, a wail of anguish escaping her lips. Jason, their 12-year-old son who had been staying with grandparents during the search, buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The investigation moved with renewed urgency. FBI agents conducted detailed interviews with everyone connected to the Thompsons: friends, teachers, distant relatives. They compiled a list of registered sex offenders within a 100-mile radius and began systematic checks. Throughout Oakwood, residents checked and rechecked garages, sheds, and basements, desperate to help but increasingly fearful of what might be found. On the morning of June 10, 3 days after Lily's disappearance, a critical discovery shattered the community's fragile hope. A farmer checking irrigation equipment found a child's shoe in a drainage ditch 5 miles from where the backpack had been recovered. Small, with pink laces and a scuff on the toe, Sarah identified it immediately as Lily's left sneaker. The sight of the lone shoe, mud-stained and abandoned, broke something inside her. "Where's the other one?" she whispered, voice hollow with dread. She wouldn't take off just one shoe. The area around the drainage ditch became the new focus. Divers searched the deeper pools while officers combed through tall grass and underbrush along the banks. By afternoon, they had found what appeared to be drag marks leading from the road to the water's edge, and several distinct boot prints pressed deep into the mud. That evening, Sheriff Larson called the Thompsons to the station. His face was grim as they entered his office, Agent Martinez beside him with a folder in her hands. "We found a vehicle that matches the tire tracks from the barn," Sheriff Larson explained, his voice heavy. "A blue Ford pickup registered to a local resident. We've taken samples from the truck bed and sent them for analysis." "Who?" Michael demanded, his voice cracking. "Who owns the truck?" The pause that followed stretched like an eternity. "Richard Pearson," Martinez finally answered. "He works as a mechanic at Oakwood Auto." The name hit the Thompsons like a physical blow. Richard Pearson, the quiet man who had serviced their station wagon just last week. Who had complimented Lily's drawing while they waited in the shop. Who had lived in Oakwood his entire life, coaching Little League and volunteering at the annual Harvest Festival. "That's impossible," Sarah whispered, shaking her head. "We know Richard. Everyone knows Richard." "We're not making accusations yet," Sheriff Larson cautioned. "The tire match alone isn't enough for an arrest. We're investigating everyone with access to that type of vehicle." But the seed of suspicion had been planted, spreading through Oakwood with devastating speed. By morning, whispers about Richard Pearson circulated through grocery store aisles and church pews. Some defended him vigorously, a lifelong resident couldn't commit such an unthinkable act. Others recalled small oddities, his solitary life, the collection of children's toys he claimed to repair for charity, his eager volunteering for events involving children. On June 12, forensic results from the truck bed came back. Traces of soil matched samples from the drainage ditch where Lily's shoe was found. More damning, a single blonde hair recovered from the vehicle was consistent with Lily's DNA from her hairbrush. Within hours, Richard Pearson was brought in for questioning. The interrogation room at the Oakwood Sheriff's Department was small, walls painted institutional beige, a metal table bolted to the floor. Pearson sat stiffly in a plastic chair, his mechanic's hands, clean now, but with grease permanently embedded around the nails, folded before him. "I didn't do anything to that little girl," he insisted, voice steady as Agent Martinez showed him photographs of the tire tracks. "I drive my truck on county roads all the time. Could have been there any day." When confronted with the hair evidence, his composure cracked slightly. "The Thompsons were in my shop last week. The whole family. Hair could have gotten on my clothes, transferred to the truck." For 14 hours, agents took turns questioning Pearson, probing inconsistencies in his timeline, challenging his explanations. He maintained his innocence with increasing agitation until finally requesting an attorney. Without sufficient evidence for an arrest, they were forced to release him, but placed him under 24-hour surveillance. The community's reaction was visceral. Some neighbors formed an impromptu vigil outside Pearson's small house on Elm Street, holding signs with Lily's photo. Others, longtime friends, called the station to vouch for his character. The division spread through Oakwood like a crack in thin ice, neighbors who had stood shoulder to shoulder during the search now eyeing each other with suspicion. Meanwhile, the search for Lily continued with diminishing hope but undiminished effort. Every abandoned building within 20 miles was examined. Divers checked ponds and reservoirs. Cadaver dogs worked through fields and woodlands, their handlers grimly focused. On June 15, 8 days after Lily's disappearance, the crushing blow came. A state highway worker clearing brush along Route 23 discovered a small body partially concealed beneath fallen branches in a roadside ravine. The location was 17 miles from Oakwood, in the opposite direction from where the backpack and shoe had been found, a deliberate misdirection that had successfully diverted the search. Sheriff Larson made the hardest drive of his 30-year career to the Thompson home. Sarah saw his cruiser through the window and knew before he knocked. When he removed his hat at the door, her knees gave way. Michael caught her as they both sank to the floor of the entryway, their world collapsing into an abyss of grief. The medical examiner confirmed what the community feared: Lily Thompson had been murdered, likely within hours of her abduction. Evidence at the scene, including distinctive ligature marks and soil samples, provided crucial forensic links. By midnight, with a judge-signed warrant in hand, Sheriff Larson and a team of officers surrounded Richard Pearson's house. The arrest stunned Oakwood despite the swirling suspicions. Neighbors stood in bathrobes and slippers along Elm Street, watching as Pearson was led to a cruiser in handcuffs, his face expressionless behind thick glasses. His booking photo appeared on morning news broadcasts across the state, a balding, middle-aged man with downturned eyes and thin lips, now labeled as the monster who had lived among them undetected. Initial evidence seemed damning. Rope found in Pearson's garage matched the ligature marks on Lily's body. Soil from his boots corresponded to samples from both the drainage ditch and the ravine. Yet he maintained his innocence through initial hearings, creating a painful limbo for the community and unbearable torment for the Thompson family. Lily's funeral brought Oakwood to a standstill. Businesses closed, school was canceled, and nearly every resident lined the streets as the small white casket traveled from the church to Riverside Cemetery. Sarah and Michael walked behind the hearse, supported by family members, their faces hollow with grief. Jason carried his sister's favorite teddy bear, placing it gently atop her casket before it was lowered into the ground. As summer faded into fall, Pearson's case moved slowly through the justice system. Without a confession, prosecutors methodically built their case on forensic evidence. The preliminary hearing revealed that authorities had recovered fibers from Pearson's workshop matching Lily's clothing. A search of his computer uncovered disturbing material involving children. Most residents of Oakwood felt justice was progressing, but for the Thompsons, each day stretched into an eternity of pain. Their home, once filled with Lily's laughter and artwork, now stood as a monument to absence. Sarah took indefinite leave from teaching, unable to face classrooms of children Lily's age. Michael worked mechanically, his interactions with others reduced to essential communication. Then, in October 2001, for months after Lily's disappearance, the case took an unexpected turn. DNA analysis of evidence found beneath Lily's fingernails, initially inconclusive, was re-examined with more sensitive techniques. The results shook the investigation to its core. The DNA did not match Richard Pearson. The DNA revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation team. Sheriff Larson sat at his desk, staring at the report, the words blurring before his exhausted eyes. For months, they had built a case against Richard Pearson: the tire tracks, the hair in his truck, the rope in his garage. Yet the most crucial evidence, the skin cells trapped beneath Lily's fingernails as she fought her attacker, told a different story. "This doesn't exonerate Pearson," Agent Martinez insisted during an emergency meeting with prosecutors. "He could have had an accomplice. Or the DNA could be contaminated." But doubt had crept in like the first frost of North Dakota autumn. The prosecutor, a veteran of 20 years, shook his head. "It's enough reasonable doubt to sink our case. We need more." The news leaked to Oakwood's residents despite official silence. A town already fractured by tragedy now splintered further. Some remained convinced of Pearson's guilt, pointing to the mountain of circumstantial evidence. Others began questioning the investigation, whispering that authorities had rushed to judgment. For the Thompsons, the development was another cruel twist in their nightmare. Sarah had directed her grief and rage toward the man in custody, a focus for her anguish, a face for her hatred. The possibility that Lily's killer might still be unknown, perhaps walking free in Oakwood, unleashed a new wave of terror. "How can this be happening?" she asked Michael one night, her voice hollow as they sat in their darkened living room. "How can they not know who hurt our baby?" Michael had no answers. He had retreated into himself, speaking little, working longer hours at the grain elevator where the mechanical routine offered temporary escape from their shattered reality. Each evening he returned home to find Sarah exactly where he had left her that morning, sitting in Lily's bedroom, surrounded by stuffed animals and crayon drawings, lost in memories. As autumn deepened, the case against Richard Pearson began to unravel. His defense attorney highlighted inconsistencies in the evidence. The hair in his truck, could it have been transferred during the Thompson family's recent visit to his garage? The tire tracks at the abandoned barn matched to his truck model but not exclusively to his vehicle. The rope in his garage, common hardware store variety used by many in the agricultural community. Without DNA confirmation and facing mounting challenges to their evidence, prosecutors were forced to reduce charges from murder to evidence tampering and obstruction of justice. Even these lesser charges were tenuous, based on the belief that Pearson had deliberately planted misleading evidence to throw off investigators. On December 3, 2001, nearly 6 months after Lily's disappearance, Richard Pearson was released on bail. He emerged from the county jail into the biting winter wind, collar turned up against both the cold and the hostile stares of those gathered outside. His lawyer hustled him into a waiting car, windows tinted against photographers' flashes. Oakwood reacted with stunned disbelief. Some residents organized protests outside the courthouse, carrying signs demanding justice for Lily. Others questioned whether an innocent man had been scapegoated in the rush for closure. The division carved deep lines through longtime friendships and business relationships. The Thompsons faced Christmas without Lily and without the cold comfort of knowing her killer was behind bars. They declined invitations and turned away well-meaning neighbors bearing casseroles in sympathy. On Christmas Eve, they visited Lily's grave, now covered in snow, and placed a small decorated tree beside her headstone. "I promised her a new bicycle," Michael said, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air. "Had it hidden in the basement since April." Sarah placed her gloved hand on the cold marble. "I keep thinking I hear her laugh," she whispered. "In the house, at night. I wake up thinking she's calling for me." The investigation continued through the harsh North Dakota winter, but with diminishing resources and fading public attention. The FBI scaled back their involvement, leaving local authorities to manage the case. Sheriff Larson, who had barely slept since June, found himself increasingly isolated as community confidence in his department eroded. Richard Pearson, though free on bail, discovered that liberty offered its own prison. His business collapsed as customers refused to patronize his garage. Neighbors avoided eye contact when he ventured out for groceries. One morning he awoke to find killer spray painted across his front door in jagged red letters. By February 2002, 8 months after Lily's death, the case had gone completely cold. No new evidence had emerged. No witnesses had come forward. The initial flood of tips had dwindled to occasional misidentifications and conspiracy theories. The Thompson family struggled to find a path forward through their grief. Sarah finally returned to teaching, though she requested reassignment to 5th grade rather than 2nd, unable to face children Lily's age. Michael threw himself into community service, volunteering with the fire department and coaching Jason's baseball team, desperate to keep busy. Jason, now 13, grew quiet and watchful, shouldering burdens no child should bear. In March, on what would have been Lily's 9th birthday, the Thompsons held a memorial service at Riverside Park. They released butterflies, Lily's favorite, and planted a flowering cherry tree in her memory. The turnout was smaller than they had anticipated. Some friends had drifted away, uncomfortable with grief that wouldn't fade. Others had moved on, the tragedy becoming a sad chapter in Oakwood's history rather than an open wound. As spring thawed the frozen ground, farmers returned to their fields, and life in Oakwood settled into familiar rhythms. The Thompson case file gathered dust in Sheriff Larson's office, reviewed periodically but yielding no new insights. By summer, the 1-year anniversary of Lily's death passed with a small newspaper article and a brief mention on local news. For the Thompson family, time didn't heal so much as it taught them to carry their grief differently. They learned to smile at Jason's accomplishments, to participate in community events, to answer "we're managing" when asked how they were doing. But in quiet moments, the absence remained as sharp as ever: an empty chair at dinner, a bedroom door that stayed closed, a voice missing from family conversations. In October 2002, the final blow to the case came when all charges against Richard Pearson were dismissed. The prosecutor, facing re-election, couldn't justify pursuing a case that had collapsed under scrutiny. Pearson sold his property in Oakwood and moved away, destination unknown, leaving behind a community still divided over his guilt or innocence. Sheriff Larson, demoralized by the failure to bring Lily's killer to justice, announced his early retirement. At his farewell gathering at the Oakwood diner, he approached Michael Thompson, extending his hand with visible hesitation. "I'm sorry I couldn't do more," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I'll never forgive myself for that." Michael clasped the older man's hand. "You did everything possible," he replied. "We know that." But as Sheriff Larson walked away, Michael's expression hardened. The case might be closed officially, but for him, the search for Lily's killer would never end. The years that followed saw the Thompson family rebuilding their lives around the void Lily left behind. Sarah became an advocate for missing children, organizing annual awareness walks and speaking at schools about safety. Michael established a scholarship in Lily's name for Oakwood elementary students interested in art, his daughter's passion. Jason grew into a serious young man who rarely spoke of his sister but kept her photo by his bed. North Dakota seasons turned, bringing harvest festivals and winter blizzards, spring planting and summer heat. Oakwood changed gradually, the old movie theater closed, a new housing development broke ground, younger families moved in without knowledge of the tragedy that had once consumed the town. Lily's memorial tree in Riverside Park grew taller, its pink blossoms appearing each spring like a promise kept. By 2006, 5 years after Lily's death, her case had faded from public consciousness. Occasional newspaper articles revisited the unsolved murder, but these appeared with decreasing frequency and diminishing prominence. Law enforcement maintained that the investigation remained open, but active pursuit of leads had long since ceased. For Sarah Thompson, this gradual forgetting was another kind of loss. "Sometimes I feel like I'm the only one who remembers her," she confided to her sister during a rare moment of vulnerability. "Like she's fading away from everyone but me." In 2008, new hope flickered briefly when advances in DNA testing allowed for re-examination of evidence from cold cases. The skin cells from beneath Lily's fingernails were submitted to the state crime lab, but the results were inconclusive. The sample had degraded too much over 7 years in storage. Michael Thompson, now with threads of gray in his dark hair, received the news with stoic resignation. He had learned to expect disappointment, to armor himself against hope. But Sarah saw something shift in his eyes that evening, a hardening, a private resolve that he didn't share even with her. What neither the Thompsons nor anyone in Oakwood knew was that Michael had begun his own investigation. Each evening after work, he sat in his home office with case files obtained through Freedom of Information requests, reviewing witness statements and evidence logs, searching for overlooked connections. He maintained a detailed notebook documenting inconsistencies and questions, people who had been interviewed superficially or not at all. By 2010, Michael's quiet persistence had compiled an alternative narrative of June 7, 2001. He identified 3 vehicles besides Pearson's that matched the tire tread pattern found at the abandoned barn. He discovered that 2 registered sex offenders from neighboring counties had not been thoroughly investigated due to alibis that, upon closer examination, were provided by friends or relatives. Most significantly, he found a witness statement buried in supplementary reports, a farmer who had seen an unfamiliar green sedan parked near the drainage ditch the morning after Lily's disappearance. Michael took his findings to the new sheriff, a young woman named Rebecca Wilkins who had been a deputy during the original investigation. She listened patiently, impressed by his methodical approach but skeptical that it offered new avenues for investigation. "These are interesting observations, Mr. Thompson," she said carefully. "But without new physical evidence, I'm not sure what action we can take." Michael pushed the folder across her desk. "Just read it," he said. "That's all I'm asking." Sheriff Wilkins kept her promise, reviewing Michael's work over the weekend. On Monday morning, she called him back to her office, her expression thoughtful as she gestured toward the chair across from her desk. "There's something to your theory about the green sedan," she admitted. It was flagged at the time but never followed up on because we were focused on Pearson. I've requested the original witness come in for a re-interview. It was a small victory, but for Michael, it represented the first forward movement in the case in nearly a decade. He returned home with renewed energy, sharing the development with Sarah, who listened with cautious hope. The farmer's re-interview yielded new details. He recalled not just the car's color but a dent in the rear fender and a bumper sticker for a fishing supply company. This information was entered into law enforcement databases, cross-referenced against vehicle registrations from 2001. Weeks passed without matches. Then, in April 2011, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A woman in Fargo, divorcing her husband of 15 years, reported finding disturbing images on his computer. During the subsequent investigation, police discovered not only illegal material but a collection of newspaper clippings about Lily Thompson's case carefully preserved in a locked drawer. The man, Edward Mercer, had lived in Bismarck in 2001 and worked as a delivery driver for a regional pharmacy supplier, a job that regularly took him through Oakwood. Sheriff Wilkins immediately contacted the Fargo Police Department. A background check revealed that Mercer had owned a green Chevrolet sedan in 2001, which he had sold shortly after Lily's murder. His delivery records showed he had been in the Oakwood area the day Lily disappeared, ostensibly making a drop-off at the local pharmacy. For the first time in a decade, the investigation reignited with purpose and direction. FBI agents were called back to assist. Mercer was placed under surveillance while investigators built their case methodically, determined to avoid the mistakes that had derailed the prosecution of Richard Pearson. The Thompsons received the news with guarded emotion. They had been lifted by hope and dropped into disappointment too many times to fully trust this new development. Sarah continued her advocacy work, speaking at a child safety conference in Bismarck even as investigators tracked Mercer's movements. Michael maintained his evening ritual of reviewing case files, now including what little information authorities were willing to share about the new suspect. In July 2011, exactly 10 years and 1 month after Lily's death, police executed a search warrant on Edward Mercer's Fargo apartment. They seized computers, documents, and various items for forensic analysis. Among these was a small jewelry box containing a child's hair ribbon, pale blue with white polka dots, identical to the one Lily had worn the day she disappeared. DNA testing confirmed what investigators had begun to suspect: the genetic material under Lily's fingernails matched Edward Mercer. After a decade of dead ends and false starts, science had finally identified Lily's killer. The arrest came at dawn on August 3, 2011. Mercer was taken into custody without incident, his expression blank as officers read him his rights. News cameras captured his walk to the police cruiser, his ordinary appearance, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses, belying the monster within. Sheriff Wilkins personally called the Thompsons. "We have him," she said simply. "And this time, the evidence is irrefutable." Sarah collapsed into Michael's arms, 10 years of suspense and uncertainty breaking like a fever. Jason, now 22 and home from college, stood in the doorway watching his parents with solemn eyes, too young when Lily died to remember her clearly, but shaped by her absence nonetheless. The story exploded across North Dakota media. "Arrest made in decade OLD Thompson murders" screamed the headlines. Television reports recounted the case's painful history, the initial suspicion of Richard Pearson, the collapsed prosecution, the long years without answers. Current and former investigators were interviewed, most expressing relief tinged with lingering regret for the time lost. Oakwood residents who had moved on from the tragedy found themselves pulled back into its gravity. The town diner buzzed with conversation about the arrest. Churches held prayer services for the Thompson family. Those who had doubted Richard Pearson's innocence wrestled with guilt, those who had defended him felt vindicated but took little pleasure in it. As details emerged about Edward Mercer, the community struggled to comprehend the calculated evil that had walked among them. Investigators revealed that Mercer had meticulously planned his attack, using his delivery route to observe Lily's routine for weeks before abducting her. The misdirection of planting evidence miles from the actual crime scene showed premeditation and awareness of police procedures. Most disturbing was the discovery that Mercer had returned to Oakwood multiple times over the years, attending memorial services for Lily and even approaching Sarah once at a child safety event in Bismarck, expressing sympathy as a concerned citizen. He had kept newspaper clippings about the case, treating them as trophies. For the Thompson family, these revelations were almost unbearable. The thought that their daughter's killer had watched them grieve, had stood among mourners pretending to share their sorrow, added a new dimension to their trauma. Yet there was also grim satisfaction in knowing that justice, long delayed, was finally within reach. The legal process moved forward with deliberate caution. Prosecutors, determined to avoid the mistakes of the Pearson case, built an airtight case before bringing it to grand jury. In November 2011, Mercer was indicted on charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and several other felonies. He pleaded not guilty, but his attorney began discussions about a potential plea deal. As winter descended on North Dakota, the Thompson family faced the prospect of a trial, of hearing explicit details about Lily's final hours, of seeing her clothing and belongings presented as evidence, of enduring defense attempts to create reasonable doubt. The emotional cost would be enormous, but they were unified in their commitment to see the process through. "We've waited 10 years, Michael told reporters outside the courthouse after a preliminary hearing. "We can wait a little longer for justice." Throughout Oakwood, residents who had known the Thompsons during their darkest days rallied around them once more. Meals appeared on their doorstep. Neighbors volunteered to drive them to court appearances. When Sarah returned to teaching after taking leave for the trial preparations, her students' parents organized a support fund to cover substitute teachers as needed. For Sheriff Rebecca Wilkins, the case became a defining moment in her career. She had been a rookie deputy when Lily disappeared, had watched the investigation target the wrong suspect, had seen her mentor Sheriff Larson broken by the failure to solve the case. Now she stood at press conferences, her uniform crisp and expression determined, promising that this time, justice would be served. In January 2012, as trial preparations intensified, Mercer's attorney approached the prosecution with a proposal. In exchange for a guilty plea to all charges and a sentence of life without parole, Mercer would provide a full confession, sparing the Thompsons the ordeal of a trial and giving them answers to questions that had haunted them for a decade. The prosecutor presented the offer to Sarah and Michael in her office, winter light casting long shadows across the conference table. "This is your decision," she said quietly. "He'll never walk free either way. The question is whether you need to hear the details in open court or whether his admission of guilt is enough." Sarah and Michael sat in silence, hands clasped between them. They had imagined confronting their daughter's killer in court, forcing him to face them as a jury declared his guilt. But the thought of hearing explicit testimony about Lily's suffering, of having those images replace their memories of her laughter, gave them pause. "Will he tell us everything?" Sarah finally asked. "Where he took her, why he chose her, what happened?" The prosecutor nodded. "That's part of the agreement. A complete confession." Michael looked at his wife, reading the exhaustion in her eyes. 10 years of carrying grief and uncertainty had taken their toll. "Maybe it's time to end this," he said softly. "For us. For Jason. For Lily." After long discussion, the Thompsons agreed to the plea deal. On February 15, 2012, almost 11 years after Lily's death, Edward Mercer stood before the judge and pleaded guilty to her murder. The courtroom was packed, Oakwood residents filling every bench, reporters jotting notes, all eyes fixed on the slight figure in the orange jumpsuit. As required by the agreement, Mercer provided a full confession. In flat, emotionless tones, he described targeting Lily after seeing her during a delivery to Oakwood Pharmacy, planning the abduction for weeks, intercepting her on her walk to her friend's house. He admitted to deliberately planting misleading evidence to confuse investigators and to framing Richard Pearson by placing Lily's hair in his truck during a repair visit. Each word fell like a hammer blow on the Thompsons, yet there was relief in finally knowing, in having confirmation that their decade of questions and theories and sleepless nights had not been in vain. When Mercer finished speaking, the judge addressed him directly. "Edward Mercer, you have admitted to crimes of unimaginable cruelty against an innocent child and a grieving community. You stole not only Lily Thompson's life but also 10 years of peace from her family in this town. I sentence you to life in prison without possibility of parole, with the recommendation that you never be granted any special privileges or considerations during your incarceration." As guards led Mercer away, Sarah Thompson stood. In a clear voice that carried through the hushed courtroom, she spoke her daughter's name, Lily Thompson. Not victim, not deceased, but Lily, the bright-eyed child who had loved butterflies and art projects, who had left an indelible mark on everyone who knew her. Outside the courthouse, snow fell gently on the gathered crowd. News cameras captured the Thompsons emerging, their faces showing not triumph but a quiet, devastating relief. The burden they had carried for over a decade had not been lifted. Grief of that magnitude never truly disappears, but it had been transformed. Justice, so long deferred, had finally arrived. That evening, as darkness settled over Oakwood, residents began appearing at Riverside Park, carrying candles despite the cold. They gathered around Lily's memorial tree, now tall enough to cast shadows in summer but bare in the February chill. Without formal organization or announcement, the vigil grew until hundreds stood in silent remembrance. Sarah and Michael arrived just as the moon rose, Jason beside them. Moving through the crowd, they were met with embraces, handshakes, murmured words of support. Former Sheriff Larson, now visibly aged beyond his years, approached with tears in his eyes. "I never stopped believing we'd find him," he said, voice breaking. "I just didn't think it would take so long." Michael clasped the older man's shoulder. "We got here together," he replied. "All of us." Standing beneath the branches of Lily's tree, Sarah addressed the gathered community, her breath visible in the cold air. "Today doesn't erase our loss," she said. "Nothing ever will. But knowing the truth, seeing justice served, it matters. Lily matters." She looked around at the faces illuminated by candlelight, neighbors who had searched fields in the summer of 2001, teachers who had known Lily, children born after her death who had grown up hearing her story. "This community carried us when we couldn't stand alone," she continued. "Tonight, we want to thank you for remembering our daughter, for helping us bring her justice." As Sarah finished speaking, someone began to sing, a simple, haunting melody that others joined until it filled the park. Michael put his arm around his wife, drawing her close as they watched candle flames flicker against the darkness, each light a testament to a community's endurance, a family's resilience, and a little girl who would never be forgotten. The conviction of Edward Mercer brought a measure of closure to the Thompson family, but grief is never truly finished, it simply changes form. In the months following the sentencing, Sarah, Michael, and Jason faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives without the driving purpose that had sustained them for a decade. The pursuit of justice had been all-consuming, its achievement left a strange void. Spring arrived in Oakwood, bringing new growth to Lily's memorial tree in Riverside Park. Sarah visited daily, sometimes sitting silently on the nearby bench, other times speaking softly to her daughter as if continuing a conversation interrupted years before. She had resigned from teaching, finding the emotional demands too great after the trial. Instead, she channeled her energy into establishing the Lily Thompson Foundation, dedicated to child safety education and supporting families of missing children. Michael returned to his position at the grain elevator but found himself increasingly restless. The meticulous investigative skills he had developed while searching for Lily's killer had awakened something within him. After lengthy discussions with Sarah, he enrolled in criminal justice courses at the community college, attending evening classes after work. For Jason, now 22 and preparing to graduate from the University of North Dakota, the resolution of his sister's case brought complicated emotions. Too young when Lily died to fully process the loss, he had grown up in the shadow of tragedy, shaped by his parents' grief and determination. His earliest memories were of searching volunteers in their living room, of his mother's tears and his father's silent rage. With Mercer's conviction came an unexpected permission to pursue his own life beyond the boundaries of family trauma. In May 2012, Jason graduated with honors in psychology. Sarah and Michael sat proudly in the audience, watching their son accept his diploma. The empty chair they had reserved beside them, a tradition they had maintained at every significant event since Lily's death, was no longer a symbol of raw absence but of loving remembrance. "She would have been so proud of you," Sarah told Jason after the ceremony, straightening his graduation cap with trembling hands. Jason smiled, a rare full smile that reached his serious eyes. "I think she is, Mom. I really think she is." That summer marked another milestone when Richard Pearson returned to Oakwood for the first time since his hasty departure a decade earlier. He arrived without announcement, a grayer, thinner version of the man who had fled under the weight of false accusation. His purpose was simple and profound: to visit the Thompson home. The meeting, arranged through Sheriff Wilkins, took place on a Sunday afternoon. Sarah opened the door to find Pearson standing uncertainly on their porch, clutching a small potted plant. "I wasn't sure if I should come," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I needed to tell you how sorry I am. Not just for what happened to your daughter, but for being part of the reason her real killer went free for so long." Sarah hesitated, then stepped aside to let him enter. Michael rose from his chair, face tightening momentarily before extending his hand. The two men who had been unwillingly bound by tragedy shook hands, the simple gesture bridging a decade of mistrust. "You have nothing to apologize for," Michael said firmly. "You were a victim too." Pearson shook his head. "I've spent 10 years angry at this town, at the police, at you. Wasted years. I could have come back sooner, could have helped somehow." "We all did the best we could with what we knew," Sarah replied, her voice gentle. "Including you." They talked for over an hour, not about Lily or Mercer or the investigation, but about healing, about moving forward without forgetting. When Pearson left, promising to attend the dedication of the Lily Thompson Memorial Garden planned for later that summer, something shifted in the atmosphere of the Thompson home, a softening, a sense that reconciliation was possible even after the deepest wounds. The Memorial Garden dedication in August drew hundreds from Oakwood and surrounding communities. The abandoned lot where searchers had gathered in 2001 had been transformed into a vibrant space with flowering plants, benches, and a small fountain. At its center stood a bronze statue of a young girl releasing a butterfly, created by a renowned sculptor who had waived his fee after hearing Lily's story. Sheriff Wilkins spoke briefly, acknowledging both the tragedy and the resilience it had revealed in the community. Former Sheriff Larson, now stooped with age, stood silent beside her, his weathered face reflecting a complex mixture of regret and relief. Richard Pearson attended quietly, standing at the edge of the crowd, accepted but still apart. When Sarah stepped to the microphone, a hush fell over the gathering. "This garden isn't just for Lily," she said, her voice clear and steady. "It's for everyone who searched, who prayed, who kept faith with us during our darkest hours. It's a place of remembrance, yes, but also of hope. Life continues to bloom, even after unimaginable loss." The garden quickly became a centerpiece of Oakwood life, a place for reflection, for children to play, for community events. Its existence transformed the narrative of Lily's death from one of only sorrow to one that also encompassed beauty, community, and renewal. As autumn approached, Michael made a decision that surprised many but seemed inevitable in retrospect. He resigned from the grain elevator and accepted a position with the North Dakota Bureau of Criminal Investigation as a cold case consultant. His years of methodical research into Lily's case had given him insights that professional investigators recognized as valuable. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked when he shared the news. "Living with these cases day after day, it might be too much." Michael took her hands in his. "I found Lily's killer when everyone else had given up," he said quietly. "Maybe I can do that for other families too. Give them the answers we waited 10 years to get." His first assignment involved reviewing evidence in 3 unsolved child disappearances from the 1990s. Michael approached each case with the same painstaking attention he had given Lily's, looking for overlooked connections, Inconsistencies in witness statements, possibilities that initial investigators might have dismissed. Within 6 months, his work had helped reopen 2 of the cases with promising new leads. Meanwhile, Sarah's Lily Thompson Foundation gained national recognition for its innovative approach to child safety education. Rather than relying on fear-based messaging, her programs emphasized community awareness and family communication. She traveled throughout the Midwest, speaking at schools and community centers, transforming her family's tragedy into a mission that potentially saved other children from similar fates. In December 2012, the Thompsons received an unexpected letter from the North Dakota State Penitentiary. Edward Mercer, serving his life sentence, had been diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. Doctors estimated he had 3 to 6 months to live. He had requested a meeting with the Thompson family before his death. The letter sparked intense debate within the family. Jason, home for Christmas break, was vehemently opposed. "He doesn't deserve your time," he argued. "This is about easing his conscience, not helping us." Sarah was uncertain, torn between never wanting to see Mercer again and wondering if confronting him might provide answers to questions that still haunted her. Michael remained silent for days, considering the request from all angles before finally speaking. "I think we should go," he said one evening as they sat before the fireplace. "Not for him. For us. There might be things we still need to know, things that could help other families if I'm going to continue this work." In January 2013, Sarah and Michael made the 3-hour drive to the penitentiary in Bismarck. Jason chose to remain in Oakwood, respecting his decision to process his sister's legacy in his own way. The prison visiting room was stark and institutional, surveillance cameras monitoring from corners, a guard posted by the door. Mercer entered in a wheelchair, withered by disease, his prison uniform hanging loosely on his frame. The monster who had haunted their lives for over a decade now seemed diminished, his eyes sunken, skin yellow with jaundice. Sarah's breath caught at the sight of him, her hand tightening around Michael's. "Thank you for coming," Mercer said, his voice thin and raspy. "I know you didn't have to." Michael nodded stiffly. "We didn't come for your peace of mind. We have questions." What followed was a 2-hour conversation unlike any the Thompsons could have imagined. Mercer, facing death, spoke with a detached honesty about his crimes, not just against Lily but others he had never been charged with. He answered their questions without self-pity or excuses, providing details about evidence he had planted, about how he had observed Richard Pearson's routine to frame him effectively. Most crucially for Michael's work with cold cases, Mercer explained his methodology, the patterns he followed, the ways he had evaded detection for years. This information, while devastating to hear, had potential value beyond measure for investigators working similar cases. As they prepared to leave, Sarah asked the question that had haunted her for 12 years. Did she suffer? Mercer met her gaze directly for the first time. "No," he said softly. "It was quick. I'm not saying that to comfort you. It's the truth." Whether this was truth or a final manipulation, Sarah would never know with certainty. But something in his eyes, in the finality of a dying man's words, gave her reason to believe him. It wasn't forgiveness, she would never forgive, but it was a piece of information she could choose to accept for her own peace. Driving back to Oakwood through the winter landscape, Sarah and Michael processed the meeting in long stretches of silence punctuated by brief observations. The encounter had been neither cathartic nor traumatic, but something more complex, a closing of a circle, a gathering of final pieces to a puzzle that had dominated their lives. "I think I can sleep better now," Sarah finally said as they crossed into Oakwood's city limits. "Not because of anything he said, but because we faced him on our terms, not his. We're free of him now, even if we'll never be free of what he did." Edward Mercer died in March 2013, alone in the prison hospital. The Thompsons received notification but did not attend his funeral. Instead, they visited Lily's grave, bringing fresh flowers and sitting together in the weak spring sunshine, talking to their daughter about ordinary things, Jason's graduate school plans, the new flowers blooming in her memorial garden, a funny story from Michael's work. By summer, the information Mercer had provided was already proving valuable. Michael, working with the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, applied the insights to several stalled cases. In June, arrests were made in 2 previously unsolved child abductions in Minnesota and South Dakota. The investigators credited Michael's unique perspective with breaking both cases. The media attention that followed brought new recognition to both Michael's work and Sarah's foundation. A prominent true crime television series approached them about featuring Lily's case, emphasizing the family's relentless pursuit of justice and the innovative techniques that eventually solved the crime. After careful consideration, they agreed, with the stipulation that the focus remain on the investigative process and community impact rather than sensationalizing Lily's death. The resulting 2-hour special aired in October 2013, on what would have been Lily's 20th birthday. The Thompsons watched together in their living room, surrounded by friends who had stood with them through the darkest days. The program was both painful and validating, seeing Lily's story told with dignity and purpose, hearing investigators praise Michael's persistence, watching as the Foundation's work was highlighted as a positive legacy emerging from tragedy. Following the broadcast, donations to the Lily Thompson Foundation tripled. Sarah expanded its programs to include support groups for families of missing children, resources for communities dealing with similar tragedies, and scholarships for students pursuing careers in child advocacy or criminal justice. What had begun as one family's response to personal loss grew into a respected organization making tangible differences in countless lives. In the spring of 2014, nearly 13 years after Lily's death, Richard Pearson returned to Oakwood permanently. He purchased a small house on the outskirts of town and reopened his mechanic business in a modest garage. Initial reaction was mixed. Some residents welcomed his return as a form of justice, others remained uncomfortable with the complicated history his presence evoked. Sarah, recognizing the healing power of reconciliation, made a point of bringing her car to his shop for its first service. The gesture, reported in the local newspaper, sent a powerful message to the community. If the Thompsons could embrace Pearson's return, others could follow their example. Gradually, Pearson reintegrated into Oakwood life. He joined the volunteer fire department, donated regularly to the Lily Thompson Foundation, and eventually started coaching Little League again. His story, the falsely accused man who lost nearly everything, became intertwined with the larger narrative of Lily's case, a cautionary tale about rush to judgment but also about the possibility of redemption. In the fall, Jason Thompson completed his master's degree in clinical psychology, specializing in trauma and grief counseling. His thesis, Long-Term Family Adaptation Following Child Homicide, drew partly on his own experience but expanded to include interviews with dozens of families across the country who had faced similar losses. The work was published in a respected journal, launching his career in a field directly connected to his family's journey. "I used to think Lily's death was something I had to overcome, to get past," he told his parents when they attended his graduation ceremony. "Now I understand it's not about moving beyond it, but about incorporating it, making it part of who I am without letting it define everything I am." His words resonated deeply with Sarah and Michael, articulating the transformation they had undergone. The raw wound of grief had scarred over, becoming an integral part of their beings without dominating their existence. They had learned to carry Lily with them, in memory, in purpose, in love, without being crushed by the weight of her absence. As 2014 drew to a close, Michael's work with the Bureau of Criminal Investigation gained further recognition when he was invited to speak at a national conference on cold case investigation. Standing before hundreds of law enforcement professionals, he shared not only the technical aspects of his approach but the deeply personal motivation behind it. "When my daughter disappeared, I was a grain elevator manager who knew nothing about investigation," he told the audience. "But I knew Lily. I knew our community. I had a perspective no outside investigator could have. What I'm advocating isn't replacing professional investigation with family involvement, it's recognizing that families have unique insights that, when properly channeled, can complement your expertise." His speech received a standing ovation. More importantly, it sparked conversations throughout law enforcement about creating structured ways for families to contribute to investigations without interfering with formal procedures. Several states began piloting programs based on Michael's recommendations, creating liaison positions specifically to work with victims' families. By 2015, the landscape of Oakwood had changed significantly. The town had grown, attracting new businesses and residents. Development had transformed parts of the community, but Lily's memorial garden remained untouched, protected by a community trust established to maintain it in perpetuity. The cherry tree planted on what would have been her 9th birthday now stood over 15 feet tall, providing shade for children who played nearby, many too young to know the garden's origin story. In May, Sarah received an unexpected honor when she was named North Dakota Mother of the Year by a national organization recognizing maternal courage and advocacy. The ceremony in Bismarck brought together people from throughout their journey: Sheriff Wilkins, former Sheriff Larson, investigators who had worked the case, volunteers who had searched fields in 2001, and Richard Pearson, sitting quietly in the back row. When Sarah rose to accept the award, her voice was strong and clear. "Motherhood doesn't end when a child dies," she said. "I've been Lily's mother every day for the past 14 years, just as I've been Jason's." The love continues, the advocacy continues, the fierce protection extends to all children. That's what this foundation represents, the understanding that every child deserves the safety and justice that came too late for my daughter. As summer bloomed across the prairie, the Thompsons found themselves at a crossroads. Jason had accepted a position at a trauma center in Minneapolis. Michael's work with the Bureau of Criminal Investigation was expanding, requiring more travel throughout the Midwest. Sarah's foundation had grown beyond what she could manage alone from Oakwood. After long discussion, they made the difficult decision to sell their home, the house where Lily had lived her 8 years, where they had waited through endless nights for news, where they had rebuilt their lives in the aftermath of tragedy. The sale was bittersweet, marking both an end and a beginning. They purchased a smaller home closer to the memorial garden, maintaining their connection to Oakwood while embracing the evolution of their lives. The foundation opened a proper office in the renovated downtown area, employing a small staff to manage its expanding programs. Michael balanced his cold case work with teaching at the police academy in Bismarck, passing on his methodologies to a new generation of investigators. In September 2015, on the day they moved into their new home, Sarah found a small package on the front step. Inside was a delicate silver butterfly pendant with a note from Richard Pearson: "Transformation doesn't erase the past. It gives it meaning. Thank you for showing me that." Sarah wore the pendant to the annual remembrance ceremony at Lily's garden later that week. The gathering, once solemn and raw with grief, had evolved into a community celebration of resilience and connection. Children released butterflies, musicians played, and neighbors shared food and conversation under the cherry tree's spreading branches. Standing slightly apart from the crowd, Sarah watched as Michael chatted with Sheriff Wilkins about a recent case breakthrough, as Jason explained the foundation's new counseling program to interested parents, as Richard Pearson tentatively joined a group of firefighters who had made space for him in their circle. A young mother approached, holding the hand of a small girl with blonde pigtails reminiscent of Lily's. "Mrs. Thompson, I just wanted to thank you. Your foundation's safety program at my daughter's school made such an impression on her. She knows exactly what to do if she ever feels unsafe." Sarah smiled, bending to the child's level. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Emma," the girl replied, offering a gap-toothed smile. "I'm 7. "Well, Emma, you're very brave and very smart," Sarah said, feeling the familiar pang that accompanied encounters with children Lily's age, a pang that had transformed over the years from unbearable pain to bittersweet remembrance. As the mother and daughter moved on, Sarah gazed up at the sky above Oakwood, the vast North Dakota blue that had witnessed their tragedy and their healing. Somewhere in that expanse, she had once told Jason, Lily was watching over them. Not literally, perhaps, but in the sense that love transcends even death, that purpose can emerge from loss, that a single life, however brief, can create ripples affecting countless others. The Thompsons had learned what many who face devastating loss eventually discover, that grief is not a journey with a destination, but a continual process of adaptation. They would always carry the sorrow of Lily's absence, but they had built around that sorrow a life of meaning, purpose, and even joy. Their daughter's legacy lived on not just in memory but in action, in children protected, families supported, cases solved, and a community transformed. As twilight settled over the memorial garden, Sarah joined Michael and Jason beneath the cherry tree. Together, they lit a single candle, a tradition maintained through 14 years of remembrance. The small flame flickered in the gentle prairie breeze, casting light on three faces that had weathered tremendous storms yet emerged with a hard-won peace. To Lily, Michael said softly, his voice carrying no further than his wife and son. "And to us." Sarah nodded, her hand finding his in the gathering darkness. "To everyone who helped bring her justice, and to those still waiting. May they find their answers too." Jason added his own quiet thought, "into what comes next." The candle burned steadily as stars appeared above Oakwood, each pinpoint of light a reminder that even in the darkest night, illumination persists. For the Thompson family, for Richard Pearson, for Sheriff Wilkins and the community that had carried them through their ordeal, this was the enduring lesson of their journey, that truth, however delayed, will eventually emerge, that justice, however imperfect, brings healing, and that love, however tested by tragedy, remains the most powerful force in human experience. The story of Lily Thompson, the little girl who disappeared on a summer morning in 2001, had become more than a cautionary tale or a cold case finally solved. It had become a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the bonds that hold families and communities together through unimaginable trials, and to the possibility of finding purpose in even the most devastating loss. In Oakwood, North Dakota, and far beyond, that legacy would continue to grow, like the cherry tree that bloomed each spring in remembrance of a child whose absence had changed everything, and whose memory continued to change the world. As the years passed, the Lily Thompson Foundation evolved from a small local initiative into a nationally recognized organization. By 2020, nearly 2 decades after Lily's death, its reach extended across the Midwest, with satellite offices in Minneapolis, Chicago, and Denver. The Foundation's child safety curriculum had been adopted by school districts in 11 states, and its support network for families of missing children provided crucial resources during the most traumatic moments imaginable. Sarah Thompson, now in her late 50s, had become a respected authority on child safety and family advocacy. Her silver-streaked hair and quiet confidence made her a compelling presence at congressional hearings and law enforcement conferences. The pain that had once threatened to destroy her had transformed into a powerful voice for those who could not speak for themselves. "Every child deserves protection," she often said in her presentations. "And every family deserves answers." Michael's work with cold cases had similarly expanded in scope and impact. The methodology he developed, combining meticulous evidence review, family perspectives, and advanced forensic techniques, had been formalized into a protocol adopted by investigating agencies throughout the country. The Thompson approach, as it came to be known, had contributed to solving over 30 long-dormant cases of missing and murdered children. In February 2020, Michael received a call from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. They were establishing a specialized task force focused exclusively on long-unsolved child abduction cases and wanted him to join as a civilian consultant. The position would require relocating to Quantico, Virginia, a significant change for a family that had spent their entire lives in North Dakota. That evening, Michael and Sarah sat at their kitchen table, considering the offer. Through the window, they could see Lily's memorial garden illuminated by soft landscape lighting, the cherry tree now mature and spreading. "It would mean leaving all this behind," Sarah said, her fingers tracing patterns on the worn wooden tabletop. "Leaving Lily behind." Michael covered her hand with his. "We wouldn't be leaving her. She's not only in that garden or at her grave. She's in everything we've done these past 19 years, every case solved, every child protected, every family supported." Sarah nodded slowly. "I know. And the foundation can operate from anywhere now. Jason is established in Minneapolis. There's nothing really keeping us here except memory," Michael finished. "But maybe that's the point. Maybe it's time to bring what we've learned here to a place where it can do even more good." The decision wasn't easy, but by spring, they had made their choice. The modest home near the Memorial Garden was placed on the market. The foundation's main office would remain in Oakwood under the direction of a dedicated staff, but Sarah would oversee operations remotely from Virginia while developing new programs. News of their planned departure spread quickly through Oakwood. While many understood the importance of Michael's new role, there was also a sense of impending loss. The Thompsons had become more than just residents, they were living symbols of resilience, of the town's capacity to heal after tragedy. Sheriff Rebecca Wilkins, now in her second term, organized a community farewell gathering at the Memorial Garden on a warm June evening. The turnout surprised even those who had planned the event. Hundreds arrived, current residents, former volunteers from the 2001 search, investigators who had worked the case, families who had benefited from the Foundation's programs. They filled the garden and spilled onto adjacent streets, a living testament to the Thompsons' impact. Richard Pearson attended, now fully reintegrated into Oakwood life. The years had softened his features but deepened the lines around his eyes. He approached Michael and Sarah with a small wooden box, handcrafted from cherry wood. "I made this from a branch trimmed from Lily's tree last year," he said, presenting it to them. "Thought you might want something from here to take with you." Inside the box was a small brass plaque inscribed with simple words, "Oakwood remembers." The gesture, from a man whose life had been as profoundly altered by the case as their own, brought tears to Sarah's eyes. Sheriff Wilkins spoke briefly about the Thompsons' contribution to law enforcement practices, about cases solved and families given closure because of their work. Former Sheriff Larson, now in his 80s and reliant on a walker, made the effort to attend, embracing Michael and whispering, "You did what I couldn't. Thank you." As the evening progressed, people approached to share memories and express gratitude. A mother described how the Foundation's safety program had given her daughter confidence to report an inappropriate approach by a stranger. A young man, now an officer with the state police, explained how Lily's case had inspired his career choice. Each story added another thread to the tapestry of impact that had grown from their tragedy. When it came time for the Thompsons to speak, they stood together beneath the cherry tree, its branches now strong enough to provide shade for dozens. Sarah spoke first, her voice carrying across the hushed gathering. 19 years ago, we lost our daughter on what should have been an ordinary summer morning. We could never have imagined then that her life, her brief, beautiful life, would touch so many others. That her memory would help protect children she never met. That her story would bring healing not just to us but to an entire community. Michael continued where she left off. "We're not leaving Oakwood behind. We're taking it with us, its strength, its compassion, its determination to protect the vulnerable. And we'll be back, because this will always be where Lily lives most vividly in our hearts." As darkness fell, candles were lit throughout the garden, creating a sea of flickering light. Someone began singing Amazing Grace, the melody picked up by others until hundreds of voices blended in the summer air. Sarah and Michael stood with their arms around each other, surrounded by the community that had carried them through the darkest valley and celebrated with them on the heights beyond. The following week, they made one final visit to Lily's grave before their departure. The simple headstone had weathered nearly 2 decades of North Dakota seasons, but the inscription remained clear: Lily and Thompson, 2001 to 2009, forever loved, never forgotten. They placed fresh flowers and sat for a while in silence, each lost in private remembrance. "We're going to help other families find their answers," Sarah said finally, speaking to her daughter as she had so often over the years. "Just like we found ours." Michael nodded, adding his own quiet promise. "And we'll make sure your name continues to mean something, not just tragedy, but hope. Not just loss, but purpose." Their new life in Virginia began in July 2020. The FBI provided a comfortable apartment near Quantico while they searched for a permanent home. Michael immediately immersed himself in the work of the new task force, bringing his unique perspective to dozens of stalled investigations. Sarah established a satellite office for the Foundation and developed new partnerships with national organizations focused on child protection. The transition wasn't without challenges. They missed the open skies of North Dakota, the familiar rhythm of small-town life, the comfort of being surrounded by people who knew their story. But they found purpose in their new roles, satisfaction in extending Lily's legacy to a national platform. In September, Jason visited with unexpected news. He and his longtime partner were expecting their first child, a girl, due in early spring. The announcement brought a complex wave of emotions for Sarah and Michael, joy at the prospect of grandparenthood intertwined with the poignant awareness that Lily would never know her niece. "We'd like to name her Lillian," Jason said, his voice gentle with understanding. "If that's all right with you." Sarah embraced her son, tears flowing freely. "It's more than all right. It's perfect." That night, after Jason had gone, Sarah found Michael standing on their balcony, gazing at the Virginia stars so different from the vast Dakota sky. "A granddaughter," he said as she joined him. "Named for Lily." Sarah leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, the constancy that had anchored her through 2 decades of grief and healing and purpose. "Life continuing," she replied softly. "Full circle." As fall deepened into winter, Michael's work with the task force yielded its first breakthrough. A 1997 abduction in rural Pennsylvania, long considered unsolvable, was reopened based on his identification of overlooked evidence. Using advanced DNA techniques unavailable at the time of the original investigation, they identified a suspect, a man already serving life for similar crimes in another state. The case brought national attention to the task force and to Michael's methodology. Media coverage highlighted the Thompson approach and the story behind it, how a father's determination to find his daughter's killer had evolved into a system that was bringing justice to families across the country. Sarah watched the news reports with quiet pride. The young man she had married in Oakwood all those years ago, who had managed grain shipments and coached Little League, had transformed his devastating loss into expertise that was changing the landscape of cold case investigation. Their shared tragedy had led them both to unexpected paths of service. In December, they returned to North Dakota for a brief visit, staying with old friends and spending time at the Foundation's Oakwood office. The memorial garden lay dormant under a blanket of snow, the cherry tree bare but strong against the winter sky. They visited with Sheriff Wilkins, with former colleagues, with Richard Pearson, who had expanded his mechanics business and now employed 2 young apprentices. The town had changed in the months since their departure, a new housing development breaking ground on the eastern edge, the old grain elevator being converted into apartments, a tech company establishing offices in the renovated downtown. Yet the essential character remained, the close-knit community that had rallied around them in their darkest hours. On Christmas Eve, they attended the candlelight service at their old church. As they entered, conversation quieted briefly before resuming with increased warmth. Not the hush of tragedy that had once followed them, but a pause of recognition and respect. They were no longer defined by loss alone but by the meaningful lives they had built in its aftermath. The new year brought accelerating momentum to both their endeavors. The task force identified suspects in 3 more cold cases during January alone. The Foundation launched a comprehensive online resource center for families of missing children, offering everything from immediate response guidelines to long-term emotional support. In March 2021, nearly 20 years after Lily's death, their first grandchild was born. Lily and Sarah Thompson arrived in Minneapolis on a bright spring morning, healthy and perfect with wisps of blonde hair reminiscent of her namesake aunt. Jason sent photos immediately, his joy evident even through text messages. Sarah and Michael flew to Minnesota the following day, entering the hospital room with hearts pounding. The sight of Jason cradling his newborn daughter, looking down at her with wonder and protectiveness, brought the past and present together in a moment of breathtaking continuity. When Sarah held little Lillian for the first time, feeling the warm weight of her in her arms, something shifted in her soul, not an erasure of grief but a new layer of joy laid gently over the old sorrow. Michael stood beside them, his hand on Sarah's shoulder, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "She has Lily's nose," he observed softly. "And your smile." Jason nodded. "I've been looking at the baby pictures you sent. The resemblance is..." He paused, searching for words. "It's like a gift. Like part of her is here with us." That evening, in the quiet of their hotel room, Sarah and Michael reflected on the day's emotions. "I never thought I could feel this kind of happiness again," Sarah admitted. "After Lily died, it seemed like joy would always be partial, always shadowed." Michael understood completely. "It's still shadowed," he said. "We still carry the loss. But this is pure gift. A new life that wouldn't exist without everything that came before, even the painful parts." As spring advanced, they settled into their roles as long-distance grandparents, scheduling regular visits to Minneapolis and mastering video calls to watch little Lillian's daily changes. Their work continued unabated, Michael's task force making steady progress on cases that had languished for decades, Sarah's foundation expanding its reach and effectiveness. In May, the 20th anniversary of Lily's death approached. They had planned to be in Oakwood for the annual remembrance ceremony at the Memorial Garden, but a significant development in one of Michael's cases required his presence in Washington for testimony before a congressional committee on cold case resources. After discussion with the foundation staff and Oakwood community leaders, a decision was made to live-stream the ceremony, allowing the Thompsons to participate remotely while fulfilling Michael's professional obligations. Technology would bridge the physical distance, connecting them to the community that remained central to Lily's legacy. On the morning of June 7, 2021, exactly 20 years after Lily Thompson disappeared, Sarah and Michael sat before a large screen in their Virginia home. The image showed Lily's memorial garden in full bloom, hundreds gathered on the surrounding lawns, the cherry tree they had planted now magnificent with pink blossoms. Sheriff Wilkins spoke first, acknowledging the anniversary and the community's continued commitment to remembering Lily. Richard Pearson read a poem about transformation and healing. Various community members shared memories or reflections on how the Thompson family's journey had impacted their own lives. When it came time for Sarah and Michael to speak, their faces appeared on a large screen set up in the garden. Sarah spoke of gratitude, for the community that had never forgotten their daughter, for the purpose they had found in their pain, for the new life represented by their granddaughter. Michael shared news of recent case breakthroughs, explaining how each success honored Lily's memory by bringing other families the closure they had waited so long to find themselves. As the ceremony concluded, the camera panned across the gathered crowd, showing faces both familiar and new, longtime Oakwood residents alongside young families who had moved to town long after the events of 2001. All united in remembrance, in celebration of resilience, in commitment to protecting the vulnerable. Later that evening, after the live stream ended, Sarah and Michael sat in their living room surrounded by photographs, Lily at various ages, Jason growing up, their new granddaughter, moments from the foundation's work. A physical timeline of loss and recovery, of purpose found in the darkest places. 20 years, Michael said quietly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Other times. Like another lifetime, Sarah finished. A different world. They sat in companionable silence, each following private threads of memory. Finally, Sarah spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder what she would have been like? Who she would have become?" It was a question they rarely verbalized, though it lived constantly in their hearts. Michael considered it carefully before answering. "I think she would have been like you," he said. "Strong. Compassionate. Determined to make a difference." Sarah smiled, a smile tinged with the familiar bittersweetness that colored their happiest moments. "And like you, observant, methodical, unwilling to give up on what matters." "She would have been her own person," Michael added. "Someone we might not even recognize now if..." He let the thought trail off, not needing to complete it. The reality of their loss remained. No amount of purpose or healing could fill the space where Lily should have been, graduating high school, going to college, perhaps starting a family of her own. But alongside that enduring absence had grown a legacy of immeasurable impact, children protected, families supported, cases solved, communities strengthened. In the months that followed, Michael's task force work accelerated as their approach gained credibility and resources. 3 more cold cases reached resolution by the end of 2021, each bringing closure to families who had waited decades for answers. Sarah expanded the Foundation's programs to include specialized trauma-informed care for siblings of missing children, recognizing the unique challenges Jason had faced during their journey. Their work took them across the country, speaking at conferences, consulting with law enforcement agencies, meeting with families navigating their own paths through unimaginable loss. Everywhere they went, they carried Lily's story as both warning and inspiration, a testament to the darkness that exists in the world and the light that can emerge from confronting it. In December 2021, a documentary filmmaker approached them about creating a comprehensive account of Lily's case and its far-reaching impact. After careful consideration, they agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to preserve the complete narrative for future generations and to highlight the advances in investigation techniques that had developed in the aftermath. Filming began in early 2022, taking them back to significant locations in Oakwood, the street where Lily had disappeared, the abandoned barn where her backpack was found, the riverside where her car had been discovered. They revisited the investigation timeline with Sheriff Wilkins, former Sheriff Larson, and FBI agents who had worked the case. The emotional center of the documentary, however, was the story of what had come after: the Foundation's work, Michael's cold case breakthroughs, the community's healing, and the birth of little Lillian, now approaching her first birthday. It was a narrative not only of tragedy but of transformation, not only of loss but of purpose found. As production wrapped in April 2022, the filmmaker shared rough cuts with the Thompsons. Watching the assembled footage, seeing Lily's photograph alongside images of the Foundation's current work, hearing their own voices narrate the journey from devastation to determination, brought a profound sense of completion. Their daughter's brief life had created ripples that continued to spread, touching lives far beyond what they could have imagined. In May, they traveled to Minneapolis for little Lillian's first birthday celebration. The toddler greeted them with enthusiastic recognition, toddling into Sarah's arms with delighted squeals. The party was simple, family and close friends gathering in Jason's backyard for cake and ice cream, watching as Lillian explored her presence with fascination. Amid the celebration, Sarah found a quiet moment to step away, overwhelmed by the complex emotions of the day. She stood looking at the photographs displayed on Jason's mantle: Lily at her 8th birthday, the last one she would celebrate, Jason as a solemn teenager accepting his high school diploma, the Thompsons at the opening of the memorial garden, and now, little Lillian beaming with her father's smile and her aunt's bright eyes. Michael joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "You okay?" Sarah nodded, leaning against him. "Just thinking about circles. Endings and beginnings. How they overlap." He understood, as he always had. "She's not a replacement," he said gently. "But she is a continuation." "I know," Sarah replied. "And that's exactly right. Life continuing, despite everything. Because of everything." They returned to the party, watching as Jason helped his daughter blow out her single candle, as friends took photos and offered gifts, as ordinary joy filled the spaces that extraordinary grief had once occupied. The circle continued, widening to encompass new life while still holding space for what had been lost. The documentary premiered in June 2022 at a film festival in Chicago, with the Thompsons in attendance alongside Sheriff Wilkins, Richard Pearson, and other key figures from their journey. Titled Finding Lily, A Legacy of Justice, it received standing ovations and critical acclaim for its unflinching portrayal of both tragedy and resilience. Following the screening, Sarah and Michael participated in a panel discussion about the evolution of cold case investigation and support for families of missing children. Their message, honed through 21 years of living their truth, resonated with profound authenticity. "Grief never ends," Sarah told the audience. "But neither does love. Neither does purpose. Neither does the possibility of creating meaning from what seems meaningless." Michael added, "Our daughter lived 8 years. Her impact has already lasted nearly 3 times that long, and it continues to grow. That's not because we're special or because her case was unique, it's because when communities come together, when systems improve, when people refuse to forget, positive change becomes inevitable." As they returned to their hotel that night, messages flooded in from viewers around the country who had watched the live-streamed panel. Parents of missing children finding hope in their story. Law enforcement officers implementing their methodologies. Community leaders developing safety programs based on the Foundation's model. In their room overlooking Chicago's glittering skyline, so different from the North Dakota prairie where their journey began, Sarah and Michael sat reading the messages together. The path from that terrible June morning in 2001 to this moment had been unimaginably difficult, marked by depths of pain they would never have chosen and heights of purpose they could never have predicted. "We'll never know all the lives Lily's story has touched," Sarah said softly. "All the children protected because of what happened to her. All the cases solved because of what we learned." Michael nodded, taking her hand. "That's her legacy. Not just remembered, but continuing. Making a difference long after we're gone." Outside their window, the stars shone faintly through the city lights, the same stars that had witnessed their search through Oakwood's fields, their vigils at Lily's grave, their creation of the memorial garden, their move to Virginia, their first embrace of their granddaughter. The constants above a life transformed by both sorrow and meaning. In that moment, they understood with perfect clarity what they had been learning for 21 years, that the deepest grief can coexist with profound purpose, that loss can generate creation, that endings contain beginnings, and that love, once given, never truly disappears but continues to shape the world in ways both seen and unseen, measured and immeasurable, as enduring as the stars themselves. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.